So he did say a lot of things, talking about pushing the bipartisan legislative agenda, promising executive accountability, and saying that he will restore the place of parliament in our democracy. Martin, one of the things that pundits have been talking about in the very early years or times of the Ruto presidency has been criticizing the manner in which we saw a number of small political parties crossing over from the Azimio coalition side, you know, like Ali Roba's UDM, which has about 8 members of National Assembly and 3 senators. We also saw Mandeleo Chapchap also switching over. So a lot of people were accusing the president of, you know, compromising the opposition or minority, as it were. Yet he's saying here that he will restore the place of the democracy, of parliament in this democracy. What is your take on that?
You see, the president is a very smart person in terms of knowing what to speak to, knowing what the constitution is, and he's saying the right things. I mean, he's saying he'll restore democracy, he'll respect the legislative assembly and so on. But that doesn't stop him from playing politics in terms of making sure that he has numbers. He's talking about bipartisan agenda, but he's also thinking about how he can raise numbers. I think the test of it is going to be on how he carries out his agenda. For example, we do not have in our constitution an opposition per se. We have one assembly, one senate that simply plays one role, oversighting the executive. So whether you have the numbers in there or not is not the point. The point is, do you want to do the right things? Do you want to persuade them, as he used that word himself, to come along with you on your agenda? So when he talks about bipartisanship, that is a right thing to say. But more importantly, he needs to get his agenda through by simply offering the right incentives to the assembly so they can come along with him. But again, like any politician, he must say the things that people want to hear. We want to hear about democracy. We want to hear about governance. You know, those are important things for us. We want to hear about accountability. It's chapter 10. The proof of it is in the action and in the political, chessboard. All right.
Mr. Governor, you served in that house in the previous constitution when you represented the people of Chepalungu. It was a different setting, but do you think what the president is trying to advocate for can work with the kind of political discipline that this country has, with what the constitution envisages? Can we have that bipartisan approach coming from a very hotly contested election?
Yeah, I think there is quite some difficulty in that, because in the first instance, you see, he himself personally has worked in the previous constitutional setting. Now he's in another one. And you could see the contradiction in what you would rather have. For instance, when you say ministers ought to have time in parliament to explain themselves. In the current constitutional setting, there is no possibility of cabinet secretaries coming to address parliament or even to answer any questions other than in committees, as opposed to what used to happen in the previous one. Remember, in the previous setting, both government and parliament government actually sat in parliament, and they were able to be questioned and held to account, every minister to account for the actions in his ministry. That is in the Westminster style. But this is American, this is an American democracy, where everything belongs to the president. The executive works with him. He chooses who works there. And then parliament ought to be aside. But nevertheless, they belong to parties. So I think, like my colleague has said, it will be important to ensure that parties maintain their MPs so that there is some reasonable accountability on the part of the executive. They should be able to hold them to account, provided they stay within the confines of their political parties. And at the same time, recognizing what is in the national interest. Because remember that we all belong to one country. And when the president addresses the question of debt, he's not talking UDA, he's not talking Kenya Kwanza. No, he's talking about reining a wild debt burden that is actually impoverishing Kenyans. When he talks about productivity, that is not a partisan issue. It's a matter that every one of us has to address.
All right.
So I think he addressed himself to very pertinent issues,
yes,
including CDF. The only problem we have here is that the Constitution actually has got a lot of strings around there, and it's something that has to be handled extremely carefully,
right,
because you are working a very tight rope. When
right.
you start discussing things that the Constitution may start outlawing.
All right.